So, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan leads after the first round of voting ahead of his rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, but short of the necessary 50% threshold to win the election outright. That said, in the context of what had preceded Sunday's vote, the cost of living crisis, the government's chaotic response to the earthquakes, there will be some relief in the president's camp. The result was a bitter disappointment for his main opposition rival. Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu the polls suggested that the opposition alliance had a good chance of winning outright, and they didn't. And that disappointment was shared on the markets. A big sell-off today, the Turkish lira sinking to a near record two-month low, 19.67 against the dollar. Joining me to discuss is Dr. Ziya Meral. He's a Turkish-British researcher, Senior Associate Fellow at the European Leadership Network, who specialises in Turkey relations. Thank you very much for being with us, Doctor. I mean, he's got to feel emboldened by this, the president, given what he was up against.
I thought this was the closest he ever had since 2002 of outright losing an election. There were a lot of anxiety within his camp, but clearly this gives him an encouragement that all he needs now is perhaps 1% or more votes. He needs to convince his voters to go to polls again, and he needs to appeal to those who might have voted for a third presidential candidate or didn't necessarily vote, was angry at him for one reason or another. I think his job is easier than it was 48 hours ago, and the opposition has an uphill battle to fight and to see if they can pull 5 to 6%, which is less likely at this stage. But you never know. A week or two is quite long in political terms.
Well, they'll need to be creative. What do you think they'll try?
I think they're going to, first of all, focus on making sure their voters again go to ballot box and own the process, whether it is voting or counting of the votes and making sure the process runs. They will also appeal to those who might not be thinking whether actually they've done a mistake or maybe they shouldn't have voted for another candidate, and focus on what the message has been, which is an inclusive Turkey, more kind of centrist, traditional Orthodox economic policies and better delivery of services for all. And let's see if that will get him over that finishing line. But 6% is quite difficult at this stage, do you imagine?
The economic crisis was a big part of the debate. He's not willing to defend the currency by raising interest rates, Mr. Erdogan, and the markets reacted today. They were hoping for an opposition win. There's been a big sell-off. The lira slumped again. Could that be a problem for the president if that's the direction of travel over the next 2 weeks?
So it might be that actually his voters do appreciate his kind of very generous fiscal policy of increasing salaries and pensions and promising reconstruction and huge investments in spending and etc. Where the bill comes from, who's going to pay for that is the big question, which raises the question, how long is this sustainable? But he's been quite skillful and in how he communicates his policies of low interest rates and huge borrowals and kind of creates this momentum of economic development. This is definitely his weak spot. But turns out that in Turkish politics, identity, affiliations and allegiances and perhaps grievances, felt or real, are still quite dominant in how people respond to it. And many of his voters see him as the person who actually delivered an economic recovery in early 2000s, and perhaps he could do again. Will Erdogan change his course this time around? I doubt it. He's been already easing some of the tensions last 12 months, trying to attract funding from Saudi Arabia or UAE, or easing even relations with US. I think we know what to expect if he wins again in 2 weeks. That might normalize some of the market reactions, because this is not a wild ride ahead. We know exactly what has been happening. With opposition, we don't know exactly how it would have played out if they win.
Yeah. I mean, the unknown factor, I suppose, is that the third place candidate, Sinan Oğan, drops out. Potentially he is the kingmaker. He has 5% of the poll at the moment. Where will his votes go?
Well, if he wasn't there, I would imagine a good number of his votes might have gone to President Erdogan, because the topics that he touches are quite similar to him. And because Kılıçdaroğlu coalition includes Kurdish political parties and figures, Sinan Oğan's more nationalist reactionary vote constituency doesn't want to vote to Kılıçdaroğlu's coalition for that very reason. So actually, it will be quite difficult for Kılıçdaroğlu to appeal to his voters to consider their stand, even if he offers him quite a good job for next government. Sinan Oğan is likely to think that Erdogan is more likely to win, and his voters are likely to go that way, so actually could get a better deal from him. And he might not also be able to move his voters to go the direction he wants them to go. He's not an established political party with a movement or a network behind him. It's pretty much a reactionary wave he's riding. It will be interesting to see. He might not be the kingmaker, but he might definitely tip the balance by 1%. And that's perhaps enough for Erdogan to declare victory in 2 weeks.
If you look at the results across the country, one of the things that really surprised me when you consider the 11 cities that were affected by the earthquakes is how convincingly they came out for President Erdogan. I suspected that this was going to be an opposition stronghold, but that's not the case.
Indeed, I think many of us thought, obviously, earthquakes are not man-made, but the responses of a government could be held accountable. And knowing that Turkey is in an earthquake zone, and for 20 years since the last one in 1999, there has been talks of another big earthquake. I think many of us thought this would definitely cause a damage to him because he was slow to respond and demonstrate state capacity in meeting the needs. But at the same time, I think there is a sense among the voters in that area that, yes, he failed, but he's now restoring it. And this is the person who's promising to invest huge amounts of money, knows how to build things, and he can get our cities back on its kind of foot again. So that might also be, it will take some time to decode exactly how that went. But it is clear the earthquake that didn't necessarily fundamentally alter. Yet at the same time, let's not forget, this is the lowest presidential vote President Erdogan got. He couldn't win it outright in the first time around. He did with 52% last time. His own party lost some 7 to 8% of votes, even though coalition has parliamentary majority. Things are not all okay. There is definitely vote bleeding from AK Party and Erdogan to other Islamist parties or nationalist parties. But so far, on a presidential question, he seems to be holding his appeal across voters.
Dr. Ziya Meral, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. We'll talk about Turkey in the second half of our programme with our panel, Chris Morris and Joel Rubin with us in the second hour.